Hey everyone, you just tuned into the Grow Wire podcast. I'm your host, Fritz Nelson, and I'm joined by Kendall Fisher, producer and host of the Grow Wire show.
And queen of the universe.
Give people a mic and this is what they do. On this episode, we're talking with Business Insider's Chief Revenue Officer and publisher, Pete Spande. Business Insider is a huge success story in a chaotic and changing industry. It started life during a time when online-only media properties began to challenge the established guard, the print publishers who were trying to figure out this online world. And Business Insider not only thrived, it's still growing today. But how? How's it doing that and why? That's what we're going to explore with Pete.
I'm excited too, because when we walked into those offices, I was blown away by the number of people. I mean, you don't see that anymore. You don't see that with publishers anymore. The number of people in that office.
The number of people, and they had three different video studios, one right out in the middle of the newsroom, a couple of really beautiful studios as well. Quite an operation they have going there.
Huge.
So we discussed the impact of mobile for media companies, the importance of omni-channel distribution, and the most innovative approaches to social media. And we end by talking about Pete Spande's best advice and insights for anyone looking to build a career in the world of media and publishing. Stay tuned for all of this and more.
You're listening to the Grow Wire podcast, a place where you will learn the ins and outs of growing a business, running a business, or even taking your big idea, career, or personal development to the next level. It's all possible. Our host, Fritz Nelson, the editor-in-chief of GrowWire.com, will take you on an exploration of growth through candid conversations with some of the most brilliant minds in entrepreneurship, entertainment, business development, and more. Whatever your goal, we know you'll walk away with the right tools to help fuel your journey of growth.
Before we get into this episode with Pete Spande from Business Insider, we want to thank our sponsors over at the Second City. If content is king, then funny content is emperor of the universe. Second City Works, the B2B side of the world-famous comedy mecca, The Second City, uses the same comedy chops pioneered on their legendary stages to create totally original digital, social, and video content. Want your audience to pay attention to your message? Second City Works content connects because it's honest, it's authentic, and it's fall down funny. Visit secondcityworks.com to find out more. We also want to make sure you've listened to some of our other podcasts that dive into the topic of media. Recently, we sat down with Ad Age to discuss the current climate of advertising and publishing and what trends to expect in the near future. We also sat down with the CEO of ThomasNet to see how a 121-year-old company continues to build success within its niche of publishing for industrial companies. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube and glean some awesome advice and insight to take away for your own business. And if you really like them, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Okay, let's start out here with, for those people who don't know, I don't know why they wouldn't, who Business Insider is. And really, it's now Insider Inc.
Yep.
And there are a bunch of other properties. So maybe just lay it out for us.
Sure. So we started actually as Silicon Alley Insider in 2007, which quickly was rebranded Business Insider. And that's been our flagship from the beginning. About 2 years ago, we rebranded the company, or kind of created a parent company relationship called Insider Inc., which now is kind of the company name for all of our websites, which are, we have one newsroom, but there are two websites, insider.com and businessinsider.com. And then from there are all sorts of beats and divisions. So we have the three primary divisions being business, news, and then lifestyle. From there, we cover markets on Markets Insider. We cover beauty on Beauty Insider, and so on and so forth. So we have about 350 journalists now on staff, with a lot of contributors who are also working with us. We also have about 100-person video crew that are doing all sorts of video programming, shows, short videos, long-form interviews, all of that kind of stuff. And then we have events teams and all sorts of other things. So we're really, basically, if you just take away print and television, we're a multimedia company with just nothing on TV or in print.
And we took a little tour of the offices here. The newsroom is incredible. It's so many people, but also the TV studio. There's a studio in the middle of the newsroom floor.
Correct. Yep.
What do you do there?
So we have we do a lot of our interviews there in the middle of the newsroom, but we have a daily news show called Business Insider Today that's on Facebook Watch. It's in partnership with Facebook, and we're covering business news. It's about a 10-minute program. Gets roughly 1 million people watching the program per day, give or take. And we've been doing that for a little over a year now, and we're really excited by that project. And then we're launching some additional shows on the news shows on Facebook Watch in the near future. And then we have a wide array of other shows that are on both Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and, you name it, Snapchat, et cetera. So we have the most popular beauty program on Snapchat called Beauty Insider. It's doing really well. So as soon as people think they figured out, what we cover and how we do it, they encounter another piece of the puzzle, and then we're confusing people there, I guess. Yeah. So, or hopefully exciting them as well.
So we also went into this beautiful green screen room.
Yes.
What gets filmed in there?
So, if I'm being honest, we're still figuring that out, but we do all sorts of interviews in there. If someone is doing kind of illustrations, these kinds of things, we might put something on the green screen behind them. So, the example I use is Neil deGrasse Tyson wants to explain some aspect of the universe. We could put the universe behind him, and he could be talking about that. We'll often have celebrities in there, and we'll put maybe some of the work they're doing. So, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar might be in there, and we might have some of his footage from a game, but we might also have him in airplane, and we can kind of use that as a space for that. But I still don't think anyone here feels like we're using that green screen room to its full potential. So we're always looking for projects that can kind of push the boundaries on that. And, often it's just a background for an interview, sadly. So we're working on that, but it's a great space for that. There's nothing wrong with the interview. We think we can do more with that. So we're really experimenting and playing with that.
I'm going to bounce back and forth
Sure.
a little bit, but when you talked about all the different markets, how many different insider markets are
Sure. Well, so there are 22 kind of primary topic areas that we're covering. They all ladder up to those 3 divisions: business, news, and lifestyle. So those are kind of the 3 big areas that both commercially and editorially we're focused on. We have 15 international versions of our site. So most of the major economies, with the exception being China, which is a pretty big exception, but a really hard place to have a publishing business for an American company. But Germany, France, Singapore, Japan, these kinds of places, South Africa, obviously the UK, Canada, these kinds of places, we have presence as well. And a lot of our content is now also being published off of our owned and operated platforms. So on these distributed platforms, YouTube, Twitter, et cetera. So we're programming where our audience is rather than trying to get everyone back to our own and operated sites.
When you say you have presence in those geographies, you actually have people,
we have sites?
reporters?
Yes.
And so they're writing in the native languages?
Correct. In Germany, most of the content is now in German. We still have some that isn't being translated that's coming from this newsroom. If you've spent any time in Germany, most of them speak English better than I do. So, they're very comfortable with both, but they prefer the native language. Singapore, Malaysia, these places, that's all in English. India, same. But Japan is completely Japanese, and we're always making available everything that all of our different international sites produce for every other market, so they can choose to translate or not anything that's being produced anywhere in the world. And we're frequently taking things that were produced in Paris or wherever it might be, and translating that to English for our flagship site.
Interesting. So you oversee revenue overall.
Yeah. So I like to describe my job as I'm the person who's trying to pay for the newsroom and to engineer strategies to grow that newsroom. And that's as simple as my job gets. That doesn't mean that every item that produces revenue is directly managed by me, by no means. But ultimately, I'm responsible for revenue strategy and lead the advertising team, which is still the largest percentage of our revenue.
And so when you look at other markets, let's talk about geography.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach assessing whether, you go into Singapore or you go into Germany? Like, what are the metrics that matter when you're thinking about expanding internationally?
So there are really only two that we focus on. The first one is on our flagship site, businessinsider.com, because all of our international expansion right now is on the business channel, so Business Insider. Insider.com is a global site. It's one site, all English language. But for Business Insider, where are we seeing substantial audiences in a geography that
coming onto Business
onto businessinsider.com, English language only? Where are we seeing big pockets of audience? How does that stack up with the potential competition in that market? And then the second piece is this an economy that can support the effort? So is there an ad market that can make this a viable property? So if those two criteria are satisfied, we will then devote a newsroom. Often it's fairly small, maybe 2 to 5 people in the newsroom to begin with, and maybe 1 or 2 commercial people. Often they're with a licensed partner, but not always. And we'll start building that up. Where we go into a market where we saw traction on our businessinsider.com domain, so for instance, Germany, we typically see between 4 and 5 times more people use the site after a year of native language production than when we were there previously. So we already have a substantial audience, but as we redirect that traffic back to a native language site, we see the audience grow pretty considerably.
And what, just from a content perspective, my mind always goes to, well, if you siphon people off the .com into the whatever.
Yep, .de or
right.
Yep.
What does that have any negative impact on the .com traffic?
We see those markets having much more upside just because there's not a lot of organic consumption now. The biggest markets for our US site have already been tackled. So we're now expanding into markets where both our customers from an advertising perspective and our audience are maybe less familiar with us. So this is more of a long-term play.
Gotcha. And just for the sake of our listeners, ComScore is kind of a measure of readership. It's not taking direct measure as sites would measure their own traffic. It's taking some various signals and aggregating that information comparatively. When you look at publication by publication,
Correct.
They're all being measured in the same way. So it's a good way for, say, advertisers or even media companies themselves to measure themselves against each other. Those numbers may not be exactly right.
They're never right, but they're fairly wrong across the entire ecosystem.
Relatively wrong.
Relatively wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so when you talk about the advertising in those markets, let's take a step back too and talk a little bit about the business models that you guys, and now, so you guys also have a Prime.
Yep, we have
membership.
Business Insider Prime is our consumer subscription product. We also have a B2B subscription product called Business Insider Intelligence, which is merging in the new year with our sister company eMarketer. We're owned by Axel Springer, which is a large European publisher who had also acquired eMarketer. We're merging those two B2B research properties in the new year. So that will be a another line of business. And then, so we have consumer and B2B subscriptions. We also do a lot of licensing and production work. So a lot of our content is being distributed on other platforms, and they pay us for that. And then we have an e-commerce business and an affiliate marketing business as well. So if you decide to buy a product after reading a review on one of our sites, we will get a small percentage of that purchase, and we sell courses and other things that are now available to the world at large. And we have all sorts of other events and other things that are part of that. So we have we look at our business in really three buckets. There's the advertising bucket, which used to be pretty much the entirety of our revenue production. Our subscription business, which has grown. We've had subscription products for now about 8.5 years. And then we have other, which is all of those other things I was just talking about. Today, advertising is between 50 and 60% of our total revenue. But by 2024 or so, we expect that advertising will be a third, subscription will be roughly a third, and other will be roughly a third.
Want to help save the planet? Here's an idea. Go nude. Unfortunately, not wearing clothes isn't realistic for most of us, but buying sustainable clothing is. Here's Gordon Seabury, CEO of Toad & Co.
Few know that garment production can generate tremendous pollution. So that's why we're hell-bent on offering cleaner, sustainably made clothing that's stylish and long-lasting. But that's only half the battle at Toad & Co. When it comes to hitting our business goals, we've learned to focus on what we're good at and seek partners for other areas of expertise. So when it came to ensuring a consistent customer experience across all sales channels and knowing what was going on with all aspects of our business, we chose NetSuite by Oracle. They know business systems, we know eco-friendly clothes. A perfect match.
From accounting and finance to commerce and human resources, NetSuite is the #1 business system to help you simply manage your business. Right now, go to netsuite.com/toad to get your free guide, Crushing the 5 Barriers to Growth. That's netsuite.com/toad for your free guide and to hear Gordon bear all on Toad & Co.'s growth story.
That's amazing. I mean, you guys have managed that diversity of income better than most that I've heard of.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's that was always the dream.
Yeah.
For the past 7 or 8 years, but you guys have done it. What what sort of if other people in media are listening to this, what sort of fortitude must you have to really be able to diversify like that? If you told most media companies that you need to get your ad revenue down to 50% and going down from there of the share of your business, they would be like, how could I ever possibly survive?
Yeah, well, so I wish I had a really great answer to this. I have some thoughts on answers. For us, part of this diversified revenue plan is part of being basically a startup that's, we're 12 years old. So as a media startup where you're starting without a huge advertising business to begin with. This is different than saying a newspaper that becomes, has an online business as well. So we're starting from scratch, which does present some interesting opportunities to organize your business differently and think about your business differently. So that does help. So that is part of it. But the other piece of this is, I think, one that is cultural for us, that if I were to give advice to other publishers, it doesn't translate as well. Like, have a culture like ours is rarely a good answer. But for us culturally, we're very iterative and quite agile, sometimes to the frustration of people, sometimes to the delight. But we are continually just grinding on our business models to make them better and better. In fact, our CEO, Henry Blodgett, talks all the time about, hey, our whole mission is to be better every day. And if every single person is better every day, if every business line gets just incrementally better every day, over not that long of a period of time, we've made tremendous changes possible. So part of this is just constructing businesses to flourish, or to give them the freedom to figure out what's right for that business, rather than having this be just the scraps off the advertising business. So how do you set up affiliate marketing business to live or die on its own, without depending on the hand-me-downs for ads or other things? How do we just make decisions for the subscription business which are independent from the decisions we might be making for our free site, and and separate journalists and accountability and all those kinds of things? So what we have are lots and lots of small teams of people who are really focused on one opportunity/problem, and they're just grinding on that problem. And then resource allocation becomes really the most important piece of the puzzle. And where we've landed on that is we feed the thing that seems to be working really well. And I don't want to say we starve the thing that isn't working really well, but we kind of give people time to work through whatever those challenges might be until it's working again. And once it proves to be working, we feed it. And if it doesn't prove to be working, we don't give it more money and resources. And over time, you just see these businesses start to grow and flourish, and they get really substantial teams and all of these kinds of things. And then you're now integrating that into the whole. So just giving the new business the time and space to actually work through things. The priority of our business has always been to generate revenue to grow our newsroom. And that's the North Star. That hasn't changed. And if we can generate revenue through subscriptions, that is fantastic. And actually what we've discovered is subscriptions are a really wonderful way to fund journalism that isn't supportable by CPM-based advertising, cost per thousand impression ad buys. So, there are some stories that just cannot be justified as a good use of our reporters' time if it's only being justified by how many people read it and how much money could we make on those ads. Whereas for subscriptions, some of our subscribers really, really need that information, whether it be about hedge funds or the advertising industry or enterprise technology or whatever it might be. That story justifies the subscription and supports and feeds the loyalty for that subscriber, which now becomes a really profitable business for us, in the same way that expanding into Facebook Watch or YouTube shows can be very self-supporting without necessarily requiring the whole organization to be supporting it as we would a story on Trump today or whatever might be happening today. I don't even know. I don't want to know what's happening today. But so it's this giving people the space and time to grow, and in some cases fail, without having the whole ship, sink or sail based on that work.
We could spend hours talking about the history of this company and what it did and what was built here. But what's so ironic to me about all of that is that, and again, this could be revisionist history on my part, but in the early days, I remember when this thing started, and Henry Blodgett in the newsroom lording over, this was the story that was told, I don't know how true it is, standing there and counting page views and demanding, run this story, do more of this, like everything based on data, right? Which was a new thing at the time. It was, we're all looking at data, but he basically created a business around data. But now, over time, that shifts. It's not that data isn't important, for sure, but there are other things that you don't know what the data will support. Is a subscription? Well, obviously there's data in the subscriptions, but it doesn't mean that page views matter. It means that the value matters. So you do video, you do Facebook Watch, you do these things, and of course there's data associated with it, but it's now about trying new things where you don't know the answer ahead of time.
So so I actually don't think it's changed. I think it certainly has evolved. So when the site started, Silicon Alley Insider, it was Henry and 3 other people, and they were on the loading dock of our chairman at the time, and the co-founder of the company, Kevin Ryan, was also the chairman and I believe the CEO of the Gilt Group. So Silicon Alley Insider was on the loading dock for the Gilt Group, and they had to move their desks every time Fresh Direct came in with bananas for the Gilt Group team and all of these kinds of things. But it was, it was the 3 people or 4 people writing for the site. There was no commercial team or anything else. So what Henry and the team figured out very quickly was if one person went on vacation, basically 1/4 of their output was gone. And if you're funding this through pages being turned that carry ad impressions on it, that becomes really challenging. So also, you had the idea you could get a very clear sense of what the audience was interested in. So when you cover a story and no one reads it, and you spend as much time on that as you might another story, it's a really clear signal that previously you didn't necessarily have. In print journalism, long-term signals, subscribers are up, subscribers are down, newsstand sales, whatever it might be. You'd get some signals, but you wouldn't get a signal on this story was really enjoyed. This story no one liked at all. And you had some of those signals. Now, that can be used for good or for bad. So you can just start doing, what people will accuse of clickbait, and you're just feeding people the thing you think they need, and you're just playing to their base interests.
You're giving them candy and not broccoli.
Exactly. Or you can start saying, wow, our audience seems to have a lot more interest in this topic than we would have imagined. Let's give someone or some team of people free rein to explore that. So today, we have reporters who are covering the transportation and logistics industry, which at first blush to me sounded pretty dry. But it's actually a really fascinating bellwether for the economy. It's also the largest, as a sector, it's one of the largest employers in the US. There are well over 1 million truck drivers out there. And, as you think about retail, e-commerce, all of that, or much of that is being fulfilled by these trucks. So it is a really important part of the economy that as we started covering it and covering it better, we were surprised by the interest and enthusiasm that was evidenced there. So we now have multiple people covering this rather than just one. And we have a person in our newsroom named Rachel Premack, who's kind of considered the preeminent reporter on the trucking industry now. And she's sitting there doing, onstage interviews with the head of all logistics for Walmart. And he's very, very clearly knowing her work intimately and referring to the stories that she's writing. It's really exciting. We didn't know that was going to happen. That was not part of a master plan. That was evidenced through, site analytics. So, similarly, we also have discovered that really in-depth coverage of specific companies really resonates. The entire sector will revolve around a handful of companies. So we have one person now who is dedicated 100% of his time to covering Goldman Sachs. And then, in the financial services space, there are fingers in almost every cookie jar. So as a bellwether for the space, that is really powerful. It also, it turns out, is really powerful for the people within Goldman Sachs. We're now helping them understand what's going on in other parts of the company. And we have people covering, for instance, we call it the Cloud Wars beat. So it's AWS versus Azure versus Google Cloud versus Oracle Cloud versus, you name it, all of them. So that's all they cover. And they do it every day. And they're their beat gets deeper and more rich as they go on, and then we hire more people. We also have someone covering Tesla and Elon Musk, less for, I think, B2B purposes and more because everyone seems to be interested in what Elon Musk is doing. And it's a really entertaining part of our site. So there's all of that, and then we have the same thing happening in our other beats. So, for instance, on our lifestyle side, we have a woman who just recently became a mom, and she is now kind of using her own personal experience to help shape a parenting beat, and really is looking at all of the tropes that are around kind of motherhood and parenting and pregnancy and all of these things, and really poking holes in a lot of the shared wisdom that I think we've all received for generations. And there's also just a huge industry of direct to consumer and big companies who are really trying to innovate to appeal to this first generation of parents who spent their entire lives online. So, MIT engineers are devoting all of their attention to strollers and designing the perfect stroller. And it turns out that that's a really rich and interesting beat, and the way we're covering parenting is very different than most parenting sites. So a lot of that is just fed from the data.
Sure.
That also then helps us navigate the waters. So some people will say, like, hey, how did you not collapse when Facebook changed their algorithm? Or, Google algorithm changes and search traffic goes down, but you seem to be okay. Well, we certainly rise and fall with these changes, but because we're so intimately tuned to the numbers, the data that's coming into our site, we can also adjust. So when Facebook stopped having their algorithm promote short videos, we all probably have spent time on Facebook and seen the 45-second video that just played as it came into view, and you'd find yourself suddenly wanting to go to some remote island that was being featured, whatever it might be. As Facebook started to prioritize longer form content, we certainly saw our short form videos decline in popularity. But we also started to see what type of longer form videos the Facebook audience enjoyed and what types of storytelling techniques made for people to consume longer pieces of content. That information can then be shared with our entire video crew. So whether we're talking about a video profiling some innovation in cement, or a restaurant in Los Angeles that makes 31 flavors of mac and cheese, the same kind of input can happen there, and we can optimize for it.
Which American company started with a guy in a garage, was featured on Shark Tank, and now has over 1 million customers? Hint, they're reducing crime in neighborhoods everywhere. Here's Ring Video Doorbell founder Jamie Siminoff with his secret to success.
It's true. In just a few years, we've had huge growth. We've hired hundreds of people, expanded our warehouse, and we're shipping millions of units a year, all while making sure our customers are happy. I've had lots of things to worry about, but I never worry about our finance and accounting, because we use NetSuite from Oracle. From the beginning, NetSuite let me see what's going on with my business in real time, from revenues to expenses, customers and orders, even HR. I run my business from a dashboard right on my phone. NetSuite has been my business management system from 10 to a team of over 1,000, and NetSuite will be my choice as we continue to innovate and grow.
Go to netsuite.com/ring to see how Jamie scaled his business. You'll also get our free guide titled Overcoming Your 5 Obstacles to Growth. That's netsuite.com/ring for your free guide and the story of a great American company. netsuite.com/ring.
I mean, the other interesting part of all of that is this grew up in a time frame, the last, I think you said 12 years.
12 years, yep.
Where a lot of new media companies were born or tried to be born. Of course, on one degree, you had the BuzzFeeds of the world. And on the other, you had companies like the New York Times trying to reinvent themselves as a digital media company. And in between, you had, whether it was, the Recodes and Axios and Vox and Vice and all of those kind of, starting life and Quartz was another one that came to mind, right? So how did you guys ever look at the competition, or were you hyper focused just on what you were doing?
We of course we were looking at all of it, sometimes with envy. Sometimes we felt like we were smarter than them, if I'm honest. But yeah, I mean, while we have a plan that we're looking to execute against, I think it's impossible to not occasionally look in the mirror and compare yourself to others. And there are all sorts of innovations happening across the industry. And if someone cracks the code on something before you do, you'd be silly not to at least experiment with what they've learned and see if it works for you. So we're absolutely studying the rest of the industry. Having said that, there are times where a peer publisher or a competitor will make a decision. We'll say like, oh, that feels really wrong. We're not doing that. And sometimes we then later have to catch up because they were actually onto something. And other times, we're really happy that we didn't just kind of follow the herd in another direction. So the innovation happening within this space is really exciting and inspiring. We're all students of that. We've also, so I joined the company with maybe 50 people. We're now 700 people. So we've also hired a lot of people who bring in a lot of really interesting experiments, sometimes from the companies you mentioned, sometimes from a website that I had to look up before I interviewed this person because I'd never heard of it before. And they're doing really exciting and interesting things too. Or maybe they've just made a mistake that we don't have to replicate. So with the people coming in comes a lot of inspiration as well.
And you kind of started your career in a lot of ways when digital media was just coming of age. You were
yeah.
CNET long time ago, right?
Yes.
And,
yeah.
And then when you and I crossed paths, it was at a company called United Business Media, which was an old school print-based company that was trying to transform itself into a more modern and we brought you in because we needed more of that fresh blood, right? And you tried your best. You did some great things.
There was a lot of good work done.
But probably people are still stuck in the print age there. But you were part of that that change at that company at a critical time in the B2B industry. And then you went to Federated Media, and they were kind of more of an ad network kind of play. Is that fair?
We would never have referred to ourselves at Federated Media this way, but we were essentially a rep firm for some of the biggest and best independent web publishers of, I guess we're now calling it the Web 2.0 era. So,
and John
Business
Battelle,
Insider was one of them.
And
actually.
John Battelle, John Battelle, who started Federated
the CEO,
Media, the CEO. He also helped start the Web 2.0 conference.
Correct.
It was very popular back in the day.
And the industry standard before that.
There was like a 500-page magazine every month. Oh my gosh, those were the days.
That's right. It was a magazine that was covering the digital revolution, which was the irony was there even then. It was phenomenally popular and successful until the bubble burst, and it wasn't. Actually, prior to CNET, I was working for magazine companies because I started my career in publishing around the mid-90s. My first job, I was a sales assistant. In my spare time, I would do sales because I knew I could not be an assistant and not get fired. I was not a good assistant. I was a better salesperson, thankfully. I got really excited by the websites, which we were giving away as value or like as a bonus to advertisers who would advertise in the magazine. So I sold the first banner ad for a company called Miller Freeman, who no longer exists.
Part of United Business.
Also it was bought by United Business after I was there. And I just very quickly decided I could spend the first 10 years of my career in publishing getting somewhat good at magazines and slowly climb through the ranks. or I could get on this digital train, which seemed really interesting and exciting, and no one knew what the hell they were doing. So I could go and do that, and maybe I could grow my career faster. When you're living on a very small salary in New York City, that seemed like a good idea. So I just chose to make my publishing career about digital. And it proved to be a pretty good decision. It's worked out well.
But you've had a ringside seat for every major change from the beginning to now. What one or two things stand out as the most surprising or game changing in that time?
So I think there's a trend that I've noticed over and over again, that when you look at what is successful in a digital space, this is the mistake that companies who don't succeed make, and this is where the successful companies goes forward. So I'll start with memos. So at my first job, at that job at Miller Freeman in publishing, we would hand out those manila envelopes with the string, and you could write who it was, the inner office. Yeah. That was essentially our email, right? I mean, there was email just being introduced to the company at that time, but you still got your inner office memos via the manila envelope. And then sometimes you'd pass it along to the next person, you'd cross off your name, and, and away you go. But we got remarkably little inner office memos. There were very few, at least at my company at the time. I was pretty junior, so it might explain some of it. But when email came in, suddenly you got a ton of email, because the friction for email from a B2B perspective was zero. So it cost you no money. It took no time to send a memo and then to reply and then to reply again, et cetera. So this thing that was like, oh, email is just an inner office memo, now digital, is the easy and logical kind of equivalent, right? The comparison. The company that started email newsletters and could now send out hundreds of thousands of the same newsletter with zero friction outside of that. Or, for the bad side of things, the person who we later called spammers, but back in the day were just email marketers who were just taking advantage of this new medium to send direct mail to many, many more people, many more times a day than they used to. You took advantage of that and you became successful. So a lot of people will say, like, oh, this is the blank for this. This is the equivalent, just digitized. And invariably what happens when it gets digitized is it gets used slightly differently. So if you looked then at social networking, people were like, oh, this is just email, but now it's on the site. And if you remember the early Facebook time, there were no images on there and all this. And it was like, oh no, it's really more about status updates and sharing your, and then, companies like my company, Business Insider, started figuring out, hey, we can distribute our content in a link there, and we can find that audience more efficiently than we could. And this is another way to acquire a new audience. So the thing that feels like, oh, this is just an analog to the last thing, it's the company that figures out how to do that differently. So if you look, for instance, at the success of Snap, in the early days of Snap, they said, oh, this disappearing message, there's no trail any longer. That's really interesting. We can do things with that. And it was used for all sorts of different applications. But it was a unique way of taking what had been a standard messaging kind of application and changing it just slightly, and then riffing on that and growing it. So it isn't that there's one big thing. It's just that we keep making the same mistakes, and companies keep seizing on the same opportunity, just in new and different ways across the board.
And I mean, that brings up another kind of question. I don't know how much it's true here, but I've heard people in media say we've become more of a tech company that happens to do, and I think that's maybe an overstatement, but as the things that you guys are doing with e-commerce and affiliate marketing, the video, probably doing some programmatic advertising.
A lot.
I mean, how many of those platforms have you created for yourself versus using third-party tools? How much do you need to be a technology company?
So I push back on people who say, well, we're really a tech company. there are tech companies. Microsoft is a tech company. Oracle is a tech company. Google is partially a tech Google Cloud is a tech company. I don't know if YouTube is a tech company. They're really good at tech. But I think a lot of banks are sometimes like, oh, banks have to become tech companies. I don't want my bank to be a tech company. I want my bank to keep my money safe. And that means they better be really good at tech, because that's the way my money will become stolen. If there's a way, like, you need to protect me from cyber hacks or phishing and all of these kinds of things. I think every company has to be really, really competent at tech, both deploying other people's tech and building your own. But we are not a tech company. And the moment we start thinking of ourselves as a tech company rather than a company that tells stories to people who want and need those stories, we will miss we will miss a trick, and our audience will suffer as a result and then go elsewhere. There could be in our future some product that we built for ourselves that we decide to sell to other people that is technology based, and then maybe there's an argument for being a tech company. Having said that, we partner really well, which I think is an absolutely essential piece for any publisher and probably any business now. Like, gone are the days where you can just go it alone or build your own, the analog to whatever product is out there, I think. And we have a really excellent technology team that understands both how to build and fix things that are essential to our business. And there are still times where we're wrestling with technology that on paper should be really easy and isn't. And, that is just an ongoing challenge, I think, for any company and certainly for us.
And what about mobile? I mean, everybody wants to talk about, consuming media on mobile. And I'm sure you guys have stats on the amount of readership you have on mobile versus desktop. Mm-hmm. How much has that really changed in the last 5 years? And are you doing anything differently or thinking of anything differently for the future than rather we're just going to make our site consumable on mobile? Yeah.
So I can't talk about 5 years ago. I don't remember 5 years ago. But when I joined, 23% of our visits were to mobile devices or from mobile devices. So 23% of our audience accessed our content via mobile. We are now cumulatively across the company over 80% every month. We're also almost 10 times as big as we were when I started. So you can do the math there as well if, in your spare time. So mobile first, absolutely. Our lifestyle site, which skews a little younger, is over 90% accessed via mobile devices. So we are essentially a content company being consumed via mobile. And the desktop is actually the afterthought. Now, we keep making a mistake when we redesign features and all of this, that we're always starting with our mock-ups, and our designers are always starting with our desktop site. And isn't this beautiful? And when I'm thinking, I don't want to see that. I want to see the mobile first, and then you can show me how it can translate. Because, it's still a sizable audience. We reach millions and millions of people every day. So even 15% accessing via the desktop is important to us. But this is being consumed between meetings, on your phone while you're walking somewhere else. This is being consumed while you wait for your prescription to be filled at the drugstore, or it's on the subway, or wherever it might be, on your couch while you're watching television. You're consuming our content, and it's normally on your smartphone.
Yeah. Last thing, because we're almost out of time, and I want to bake two questions into one here. So you've kind of addressed some of this, but this question is kind of about the future of media and its prospects and your optimism or pessimism about it. And what would you tell anybody coming out of school or, changing careers and saying, I think I want to be in media, whatever that means, as a journalist or in marketing or in sales? what would you tell them about the future of media?
So I'll start by saying I love and have loved almost every moment of my career. While I've certainly had ups and downs, it is a really vibrant and I think important place to spend your career. So I don't think that changes. And as a matter of fact, I think we continue, whether it's news or entertainment, et cetera, to see media being a really powerful force for good or for ill in most aspects of modern life. And it is growing tremendously as more and more parts of the world get broadband connections. And, so I think long-term media is still a really exciting, vibrant, important place to work and a place where you can make a good career. Having said that, I would not be looking at analogs from 5 years ago and saying, I want that job. I would say, A, whether you get a degree in this or not, get really good at data science or as good as you can. B, decide that you really want some career that's always changing and evolving. Everyone says they do, but a lot of people actually are deeply disconcerted by constant change and disruption. So if that's not for you, this is not the place for you. And C, don't be looking at external validation as your primary currency, because a lot of people do not like media any longer, or at least have really mixed feelings about media. And if there are, if money or other things are your primary concern, there are probably other ways you could make more money than this. Go into investment banking, go into, data science somewhere, for finance or something like that. However, having said all of that, to the negative, my company has featured restaurants that now are booked for months in advance, and the owner of the restaurant will call up our switchboard and say, I don't know who you are, but that review just completely changed my life. We're going to have to open a second location. That's really amazing. Or we were one of the companies that were really digging into some of the issues around the WeWork funding prior to the IPO being launched, and talking about how, as companies are staying private longer and longer, there are some real corporate governance issues that show up. I think we were part of many publications that were helping to save a lot of investors from investing in this hot IPO that really wasn't ready to be valued at $47 billion, but rather at $3 billion. I think that's important, and that's meaningful. And I didn't cover that story. I didn't cover the restaurant, but I had a hand in helping pay for the people who did, and that's awesome. And that's something I can feel proud of, and that's something, when I don't have grandkids, but when I do, I hope I can point to these sites and say, yeah, I had a hand in building that. And that's I think, really meaningful.
Yeah, well, that's why I got into it too. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You heard him loud and clear. If you're already in the world of media or looking to make your way into it, make sure you can handle a career that's always evolving. Don't look at external validation as your primary currency. I mean, that's what I did. That's why I got into it. I don't know about you, Kendall. Well, obviously you did.
Yeah.
And also, this is kind of interesting. I mean, get really good at the data science. I mean, that's part of it. It's not just about creating the content. It's understanding who's seeing it and why. Thank you so much to Pete Spande from Business Insider for joining us on this episode of the Grow Wire podcast. I also want to thank our sponsors at The Second City and Ring, our editors over at Lampstand, as well as, for some reason, our producer, Kendall Fisher.
Thank you so much, Fritz, for that one line about me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you wanted the validation. I gave it to you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I got into this for, was for the external validation. So
there you go.
I need that currency.
Check that box. And of course, all of you listeners for tuning in. Can't wait to do it again next time.
You just listened to the Grow Wire podcast with host Fritz Nelson. Make sure to keep tuning in for more episodes full of tips, tools, stories, and strategies to help take your personal and professional growth to the next level. Until next time.